So hello and welcome everybody. I'm Nathalie Cooke, a professor here at McGill and Associate Dean of the Rare and Special Collections in the McGill Library. A special welcome to those involved in the Play On 2020 series of events, which in part focuses on creating moments of wonder and opportunities for play with our collections. Tonight's a bit different. I'm delighted to welcome the creative wizards who conjured out of the ether McGill Library's virtual orientation game. Now, this is actually a chance for our creative team to meet and talk through the game and the work involved in getting it into playable form. For despite working very closely indeed over a period of months, the whole team has never had the chance to meet together in person. So we hope tonight's talk sparks moments of wonder, and we invite you to post your questions in the chat for the Q&A with panelists after the talk. If you have technical difficulties, please also post a message to me in the chat or email roar.library@mcgill.ca for assistance, and we'll put that link in the chat as well. So just to kick off the discussion of the game, we're going to try and show you a picture of the game to give you a taste of what it feels like. So I'm going to let Jacqueline share her screen. So thanks to Jacqueline and Michelle, who are the wizards behind the presentation today. So what is the game and why did we think to make it? Well, it's an online puzzle-based escape room game that offers a multimedia experience using Instagram, Twitter, Bandcamp, Google Street View, library catalogs, YouTube, and more. Now, we began building the game in the early summer when it was clear that many McGill students would not be able to come to know the campus in person. We wanted to build an engaging and interactive way for students and others to learn about McGill University's history, the campus, and the library collections remotely. We raced and managed to release the first game in time for Frosh at the beginning of September, and it's been playable at any time since then. The game has had a great reception, as you'll hear. Players have come from North America, as well as Japan, the Netherlands, Hong Kong, South Korea, and France. And it's going to have a new life as it stays and is publicized in different ways. So why did we build a game? Well, when the coronavirus took off and we were forced to close our spaces, we pivoted entirely to online programming. And in keeping with our interest in serious play, games with learning objectives, we built a virtual exploration of the library in a challenging game environment. So to give you a taste of what the game feels like, here's a video recap of the first game, which will give you a bit of a glimpse. Thank you, Jacqueline. So let me first turn and introduce our lead wizard. This is our creative head, Paul Darvassi, and he's going to speak to us about why he decided or for the team to settle on this style of game. Dr. Paul Darvassi is a very talented educator and game designer whose work looks at the intersection of games, culture, and learning. His research explores how commercial video games can be used as text for critical analysis by adolescents. Paul's work has been featured on PBS, NPR, CBC, The Huffington Post, Polygon, Killscreen, Gamma Sutra, EdSurge, Edutopia, and Mindshift, and most recently, we're very proud to say, on our McGill platforms as well. Welcome, Paul.
Well, thank you very much, Nathalie. Yeah, that was a wonderful introduction. So the question around how, the assets that we chose to use for this game and why we chose the particular direction, I think there are a number of reasons for that. One is, or that went behind our decision making. One was a game that I had recently created with Nick Vassos, who's also on this team, at the school where I teach. Which had sort of its objective in order to create a virtual rendition of our school and environment, so that during COVID, when the students had been sort of exiled from their beloved school, they could still connect with the history and the location of the school. And we used a variety of tools to create that locative experience. So when we shifted our attention to McGill, we approached it with a similar spirit of trying to bring students from around the world who would not be on campus, in some cases who had never visited campus, and give them a sense of place, give them a sense of what the campus was like and some of its features were like. And the other side, in terms of our thinking behind this game, was using tools to build it that were empowering, in the sense that we are not programmers, we're not people that have a studio of artists and all kinds of things at our disposal, like Ubisoft or one of these large developers. And I think that part of the message the game sends is that you can actually develop these interactive online experiences using everyday tools like social media, website building tools, anything from the Google suite, and combining them in creative ways in order to enact a game-like experience. We were certainly inspired by escape rooms, but it stretches the escape room conceit out into something which I think looks a little different. So I would say that it's a hybrid, not just in terms of the various platforms that we put together, but in terms of its game-like inspiration. And I think it kind of slightly eludes any clean genre. I mean, it's not quite an escape room. It is a narrative game. There are puzzles, but it certainly has a life of its own.
Thank you very much, Paul. And you've already heard that Paul brought Nick onto the team as well. So Nick started working on our game from Toronto, but he's now coming to us from Kingston. And he's going to speak a bit about the content selection, how his previous experience building games informed this game, and the appeal of games for his generation. Nick is currently a film student at Queen's University who nourishes his passion for filmmaking and design in an array of multimedia projects. He has directed, shot, and produced a series of short experimental films and has recently turned his creative energies to game development. He co-directed with Paul, designed levels and produced film and audio for the Circle 1964, which was an archival alternate reality game in March 2020. And he produced the various cutscenes and short films for the 2 installments of Raising Spirits, an online orientation game for McGill University Library. That's a spoiler alert. That means there's a second game coming. Nick.
Nathalie, thank you very much. Yeah, so I can speak on all of that stuff. So yeah, my name is Nicholas Vassos. I'm first year film student at Queen's University. And I'll first go over my role on the team, and then I can jump into some of the stuff that I've done. So yeah, I did videography, film editing, stuff like that. In the first game, there was 5 different videos. 4 out of 5 of them were my creations. I made them from scratch, and I can get into detail on that in just a minute. I think my place on the team, though, is quite interesting in that I bring in a bunch of different perspectives. So I bring in the perspective of a filmmaker, sure. I bring in the perspective of a game designer, one who has made that game for my high school with Paul. And then I bring in the perspective of the game's target demographic, which is a first-year university student who may or may not be on campus. Now, being a student, I was able to give feedback on puzzles and stuff, giving that harsh perspective of what an 18-year-old, you know, what he would want to see, he or she would want to see in a game like this, and what would keep their attention for a decent amount of time. So the beautiful thing, Paul was talking about it, and I'll just touch on it again. The thing about this game, one, is it's designed to be an engaging experience, yes, but two, it's also designed to integrate you into McGill's campus, culture, and history without even being there, which I genuinely think is pretty special. Now, what's great about this game, too, is that it can be preserved as an artifact. You know, years from now, people could pick up this game and use it to have fun, yes, but also to learn about these historical buildings and people that occupied the campus however many years ago, right? Another great thing is that COVID, unironically, has, you know, I guess ironically has brought us together, you know. Many of us are in different cities and even different countries, and so this game likely wouldn't have existed in a pre-COVID world, or if it did, it would have taken a vastly different form. Anyway, the most important thing for my role is how I chose what items to feature, so I'm going to touch on that now. The thing with McGill and its libraries is that there is so much information. It's frankly amazing. A similar game, the one I made for my high school, it was a completely different experience making it, in that there was only 50 years of yearbooks to look through, which seems like a lot, but McGill has centuries of data, journals, books, photos, schedules, people. It's so expansive and frankly quite intimidating. And I didn't even make the puzzles too, so other people on the team will touch on that. But the first question we really ask ourselves when looking at this data and in these artifacts is, what are we even allowed to put in? Because some of this stuff is copyrighted between the different libraries, and there's a lot of complications with that. And then the second question we have to ask ourselves is, what kind of story are we telling, and how do the different artifacts and people lead the player to a conclusion or a prize or an end goal? So I had no part in making the puzzles, but you know, like other people on the team can speak on that a bit better. But I made these videos not fully knowing how it integrated into like the final narrative. I got to see it in action once I beta tested the game, and frankly, I was very like happy with it. You know, it worked out a lot better than expected. So for these videos, how it would work, Paul would call me. He would share with me on Google Drive a few photographs or videos and stuff like that, and he would give me full creative control. He would say, you know, I want to make it seem like you're traveling back in time, or we're revealing this character. So really the hardest part of these videos was making something out of very little information. So for example, what's on the screen here, the Amy Redpath Roddick video, it was made using, that little bit was made using one photo. If you want to play it again, just to see what it is. That was made using one photo, and there are the eyes that come out. There's actually in the game, there's a little sword sound effect just to make it a little more dynamic, and it pans out to reveal Amy. So that's all one image, and the text next to Amy, I manually made it move just a little bit, which having these little bits of movement in static images can make it just so much more dynamic, you know? So it's the little things like that within these videos, which I'm quite proud of. And yeah, there's actually one more video that I wanted to touch on. There's this final video that reveals a character called Osler. It's towards the end of this recap, and it uses a roulette or a slot machine style effect to, yeah, there it is, to pick the correct time in the schedule, and then it reveals who's behind all of it. So if you actually pause right here quickly, yeah. So I made that from scratch. That roulette thing I made from scratch using only that image. And the idea for it just kind of clicked in my head. So to make these videos, I took inspiration from a variety of sources. I modeled the visual thing of the roulette from a video game. There's a video game called Counter-Strike Global Offensive where there's a microtransaction in it where the different cosmetic items kind of scroll through like that. But that's only the visual part of it. The sound design I actually took from a video of a woman testing out a vintage Rolodex, which seems a little strange, but when you put that together with the visual from the schedule, it creates the feel of some sort of rickety old machine from the 1800s, which is exactly what I was trying to go for. And yeah, I took inspiration from a variety of films, video games, online videos, and just my head to create something new. And that's kind of my role on the team. Yeah, so there's the video. So yeah, when you see the two things put together, it obviously creates a really cool feel. And that's what I did for all of the videos in the game. Before I stop, that's basically it. But before I stop, I wanted to reiterate one more thing. And that is that games like these normally take months, if not years, to create. This team of people before you today that are going to keep speaking, they have made a fully realized, engaging experience in a matter of months and weeks, which is something we really can't take for granted. I play a very minor role on the team, but all of us have been working very hard on this stuff. And if you know people that haven't tried the game or haven't even heard of it, tell them about it, because this is genuinely an experience worth sharing and one that no other school really has the opportunity to do at the moment. So now's a better time than ever to begin playing and begin exploring McGill's history. And so I think, yeah, that's it for me. I'll pass it on to Nathalie again. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Nick. I think you're probably getting a feel for the kind of energy, enthusiasm, and talent that we have on this team. So let me keep going. From Toronto to Kingston, now we're moving to Mexico City. And to join us and speak about player types and the advantages of a multi-platform nature of our game, Elisa Navarro Chinchilla. Elisa is an educational video games developer and designer. She founded Gargamel Studio based in Mexico, with more than 20 games for companies and organizations such as the United Nations, Televisa, the Philharmonic Orchestra of the National University, Children's Museum Papelotti, among others. Convinced of the power of games in collaborative learning and in games for unprivileged contexts, her last game, Chaka, Break the Silence, is a game to prevent gender violence and to reinforce socio-emotional learning. We were very excited to have Elisa join our team.
Thank you, Nathalie. Hi, everyone. As Nathalie mentioned, I'm based in Mexico, normally in Mexico City. Now with COVID, we're a bit far away. Sorry if my English is a bit rusty. I've not been using it recently. But anyway, first of all, I would like to tell the story. I was invited by Paul. We have many ideas on how to create new interactive experiences, gamified in several formats. And for us in Gargamel, it was a very nice experience because we normally try to make a video game or a game in a commercial sort of way in which the game looks alike, all in the same like uniform style. And these games, Rising Spirits, is a pastiche. It's like a multiplicity of games. It's like a diversity of platforms, of softwares, of images. So it's contrary to what commercial games try to do, where everything looks nicely in the same style. No, that's an interesting aspect on it. Another thing is that, as Paul mentioned, we are really interested on trying to make teachers and parents try to make gamified experiences in this do-it-yourself style of things. No, so as Paul has done in this game, you can use Instagram accounts, you can use Twitter, you can use whatever. There's thousands of prefab things out there, so you don't have to be a professional in order to create this kind of interactive experiences. No, this game is the contrary of a competitive sort of game in which you need to finish as soon as possible, and that makes it a really rich game in terms of experience. No, I'm going back to an old taxonomy from '96 from Bartle that speaks about 4 types of games players. There's the killers, the competitive that enjoy like being like killing everyone. There's the achievers that like badges and that like scores and that they want to show off. No, and the socializers, which is which has been very interesting in these COVID games that allow this kind of socializing. But this game especially is dedicated for the explorers, for those who want to go slowly looking at things, because there's so many nice images and library documents from the past that normally are in security boxes and that you don't have access. So it's a way to go around looking at all these different things in detail at your house with a coffee and just taking a look at interesting documents from the past that we normally don't know how to use, no? So I hope you enjoy this game, and I hope you enjoy game 2, which is coming as well.
Thanks so much, Elisa. And that's a perfect segue. I'm now going to lift the veil and introduce some of the talent in our team of librarians and library staff members. So to talk about sourcing archival content and weaving a game narrative around it, I'm going to introduce you to 2 of our archivists. First, Julian Coutu. Julien has been working at McGill University Archives since April 2018. He's in charge of the reference service for the McGill University Archives, and he came to us from the BANQ. He's been enamored with video since he received his SNES, and he had to tell me what that was, Super Nintendo Entertainment System, when he was 5 years old. A regular gamer, he's invested countless hours in Diablo 2, World of Warcraft, the Zelda series, and many more. And joining him is Aeron MacHattie. Aeron is a librarian and archivist who's been working with the Roar collections since November 2019. Before coming to McGill, she worked for the Canadian Centre for Architecture and the Toronto Public Library. She's happiest getting lost in a book, solving a puzzle, or exploring the world with her dog. So welcome, Aeron and Julien.
Thanks, Nathalie.
Thank you, Nathalie.
So I'll go first, and I'll talk a little bit more about identifying archival content that we wanted to use in the game, and Julien will talk a bit more about how that's integrated into puzzles and how the puzzles were designed. So you'll get a little bit more about the narrative design process when Hannah speaks a little later in the panel. But basically, once an idea started to take shape, we would start to look at the collection to see what we had that could support those various stories. And that often looked like a kind of a traditional reference request search process. But it also meant that we had to look for something very, very precise. So often when you're doing archival reference, you'll get a question, you'll look at the material, and you'll see whether that answer is there. And sometimes that answer isn't there. But even more precisely, you know, we might find 3 or 4 photographs of a particular area in the campus, but they wouldn't necessarily depict clearly the thing that needed to be highlighted for a given puzzle. So it's a little bit more challenging than traditional archival reference, but it is a really fun challenge to find those very precise things. However, sometimes you wouldn't find the thing that you wanted, and you would have to kind of approach it from a different angle. This particularly came up when we started trying to look for ways to highlight narratives that were outside of the kind of mainstream traditional history of McGill. So we wanted to highlight narratives about Indigenous and Black people in McGill's history. And because archival and library collections reflect the kind of the people who are in power, often these collections are very white-centered. And so other histories like those of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, queer people, or working class people aren't as visible, and sometimes the documents that tell those stories aren't actually there. So we had some frustrations trying to find documents that would support those stories, but we were quite successful in finding some women who are maybe not quite highlighted enough in main histories of those. So I'll pass it over to Julien now to talk a bit more about puzzles.
Thanks, Aeron. Everything that Aeron said is right on point, and Aaron's been great helping us with building games and narratives around our archival content, because that's it's a tough thing to do, actually, puzzle building specifically, because we have so much on our hands and so much great items that we could use for this kind of game. So we have to be very selective about what we want, and so we have to check I would say certain boxes that would allow us to build puzzles around them. One of them is that it has to fit into the narrative. We have to find some kind of way that the item that we have or the artifact that we found has to be related to our main narrative of the game. So that's one of them. I would say another point that we have to make sure that we are aware of is that we have to be informative as well. We want to We want to make sure that the players are learning about McGill Library, they're learning about McGill history. So that's another thing that we have to keep in mind for puzzle building. And another one, I would say, the last criteria that we're looking for is that we want an object that is appealing. We want something that's visually striking, or that has symbol on it, something that is quite flashy. So we've used, for example, what you see on the screen right now is the last will of Amy Roddick Redpath. We also have the nice map for the fences of McGill. We've used really interesting objects and items, but the process, I would say, could be a bit different from a regular game when you have your narrative and you're building the game from the narrative down. Sometimes what happened is that we have this great item and say, oh, well, this item is so cool, we could make a great puzzle with it. So how do we make it fit with the narrative? So sometimes we change the narrative. So it's a back and forth game between the item and the narrative that we want to tell as well. So that's been really interesting, and I never did any puzzle building before, so that was my first shot at it. It was great because Paul had these ideas and these themes that we wanted to work with, for like time, for example, and we have these great buildings that we have a lot of photos and objects and other material like that, and we want to use them in the best way possible. And one thing that we also did is really we played to our strength, because I'm not I'm not a game developer. I'm an archivist first and foremost, but I have experience in audio editing software. So I sat down with Paul, we chatted, and we decided that we could add like 2 audio puzzles, and I could be part. Of this specific puzzle building. We did 2 specific puzzle around this. One, it was with the gargoyle. So we had this red path gargoyle, and I edited audio files. So you have to solve the gargoyle's riddle. And another one was more of a transitional moment, and that we used as well with Amy Redpath talking. So, and we use also different medias. We use Bandcamp and we use SoundCloud for these. So it really fit into the whole thing. But it's been challenging, but it's been great. It's been fun working with the team and with Paul. So
thanks so much. You know, we've been so positive so far. We've talked about all the advantages of COVID, that we can work with an international group, we can work closely with people we've never met. But it's worth remembering that we were actually doing this when our buildings were closed. And so not only were we trying to find rare materials and archival materials, we were also quite often previously digitized. And so now I want to bring someone to the table who is responsible for our digitization program here at McGill. So to talk about element creation for a digital game world, digitization in our digital collections, as well as past library games, I want to introduce to you our very talented, artistically talented Greg Houston. Greg has been working as the digitization administrator at McGill University Library for the past 12 years. He's responsible for overseeing all aspects of digitization and managing the library's digitized resources. Prior to working at McGill, he worked as an animator on several children's programs and as a multimedia specialist. His love of gaming started over 35 years ago when he was a regular at Pinocchio's arcade in the West Island, and he spent hours playing Dungeon Master on the Atari 1040 ST. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Nathalie. Raising Spirits has been a really fun experience for me, and I think I'm one of the people who had the honor of being able to work on elements for the game without knowing too much of the narrative. And I was actually lucky to have the chance to play the game with fresh eyes. Now, I was able to work this way because the game itself was broken into mini games, and creating elements could be done piece by different people, almost like we were building pieces for a large puzzle that Paul, as creative lead, was putting together to form a big picture. Now, in regards to element creation, Raising Spirits really raised the bar. As you've already seen, not only did we use images, audio, and video content, it utilized a number of interactive elements that were built by a crew of talented people like Nicholas and Elisa and Paul. Now, this opening slide shows a few graphic elements that I worked on for the game. They're examples of how an image can be augmented with just a few simple adjustments. Some of the photos were adapted by adding a detail like a hand holding the photograph, or stylizing an image like you can see with the red path building, or creating a weathered look to a document, as you can see with the floor plan. Next slide. Now, even though I created a few graphic elements, the bulk of my contribution was in digitization and retrieving images that served as building blocks for the game. Now, we have an incredibly vast and varied digitized collection, and our digitization service was a great resource. In some cases, these digitized images were a launching point to inspire the narrative and see which elements could be adapted into a game feature. Now, if you don't know about our digitization program, we have captured and provided access to millions of pages and objects from our collection for over 20 years. We offer a free digitization for research service that actually continues to operate during this time, and it's open to users from all around the world. Now, this is a snapshot of some of the variety of items we've digitized, including artifacts and books and photographs. And yes, that is a box of porcelain eyeballs in the corner. It's one of the many historical medical artifacts that we have. Next slide, please. So the library's in-house digitization lab, I wanted to show you a snapshot of that. As you can see from these slides, we digitized most of the rare material from up above. And we use these sophisticated cameras and scanners to capture it. Next slide. We also digitize large collection level projects with over 80 digital collection sites, including the yearbook site that was featured in the game. Next slide. We upload digitized material to institutional and collaborative repositories such as HathiTrust and the Internet Archive. And we have about 17,000 digitized ebooks at archive.org alone. Next slide. I'm sorry for a lot of the slide changing, but we also digitize archival holdings in the McGill hosted archival collections catalog, a site that you're probably familiar with from game one as well. So all told, there's a wealth of information that was already online that helped inspire Paul and the rest of the creative team. Next slide. Now, in addition to all the digitized material, we were able to adapt a host of other online resources that the library has created over the years, such as floor plans, orientation videos, social media sites, and other infographics. All these items are part of the library's history and can help tell a story. Next slide. So raising spirits is one of the most innovative things I think we've done with our collections. In my experience, the closest thing that the library has done was the Amazing Library Race, and it was an orientation activity that was held during Frosh Week in 2012 and 13. And this was a race around campus with different challenges at every library branch. And as much as that game was enjoyable, the game only lasted 90 minutes and it required a lot of staff to coordinate for a game with maybe 60 to 70 participants. Next slide. In comparison, Raising Spirits really had no limits. The game can be played at any time, at any location off campus, with no limits on the amount of players. It can continually evolve with new puzzles, almost like downloadable content for a video game. And it could also be shared and is easily accessible to anyone with a PC. So in some sense, it has now become part of our digital legacy as an institution, and I'm proud to be part of it. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Greg. Not really getting a taste of the kind of talent and energy that went into this. So now we're going to offer you a sneak peek of what is yet to come, and also invite Hannah Deskin to join Paul in describing the process of creating a game narrative. Hannah has been working at the McGill Library since she was a student intern in 2016. Hannah's interest in video games and storytelling inspired her work on Raising Spirits, where in an outreach role with Roar, a collection of the 4 special collections units at the library, she helped with promotional material and narrative design. Hannah herself has logged many hours playing her favorite video game, Zelda: Breath of the Wild, and is proudly getting very close to solving every single shrine puzzle. Welcome, Hannah.
It's an accomplishment, that's for sure. I think I'll talk quickly about game 1, narrative development, and then leave it to you, Paul, to talk about the second and third games, if you'd like. So it was actually, the narrative development informed quite a few elements of the game, as you've kind of heard my colleagues describe. I worked with Paul and Aeron McHattie on this, and we met quite often, and it was a very iterative process over several weeks. We were meeting at least twice a week for these long brainstorm sessions. Up to 2 hours sometimes. It's really just how you get your creative energy going. And they were rather informal, and anyone who's been a part of a creative process kind of it's important that it remains informal a little bit, and that it's a safe space to kind of project ideas and just shoot anything at the canvas and see what sticks. So it can seem a bit nebulous at first, but things ended up coming together in the end. Early in the development process, though, with the narrative, we identified a need to create a game that were linked cohesively. We hoped that this would provide an impetus for continuing gameplay, so people would follow the story throughout the game itself. But we hoped it would also leave players on a cliffhanger at the end, which would draw players back into subsequent editions of the game. We also identified quite early on a few key dates that we wanted to release the games in time for. So the first was Frosh, which was late August 27th, exactly. That date is burned in my brain forever. And then the second was Halloween. So that's when the next game will be coming out, a little spoiler. So we kind of wanted to create something that was a little bit mysterious, a little bit dark, so that it was in line with this kind of Halloween theme date that we knew we would come up against later. So ghosts were an obvious choice, and it was a choice that also provided us the opportunity to conjure some of the giants of McGill's storied past that would lead players through the narrative and accompanying puzzles. So this speaks to what Nick was saying earlier about kind of skirting those copyright issues. Sometimes it's easier to work with stories that are a little bit older because the materials that you find will generally be more out of those copyright limitations. So it did take us some time to choose exactly what characters we wanted to highlight. First, it seemed important for us to highlight stories that were uplifting, engaging, mysterious. The dark theme of the disruption and the poisoner was to create tension between main protagonists and present the players with a problem to solve, which is something that generally drives people to continue. So we also wanted to highlight the lives and stories of women important to the history of university, as Aeron described earlier. This was in part because the development team was 2/3 female, being me, Aeron, and Paul, and it seemed like an issue we could do justice to. So we landed on 2 heroines eventually, Amy Redpath-Roddick for the first game and Maud Abbott for the second, each who left an indelible mark on the history of the university, even though sometimes their accomplishments are sometimes overshadowed by their male counterparts and mentors. Then the challenge became thinking of objects in our collection that we could gamify, and we've heard the many talented people who were able to actually accomplish this. We had the idea of using an archival class schedule, which is what you saw Nick describing as he went through the kind of the Rolodex video element that he created. So this was an element that people discovered during gameplay, which was pretty cool because during the release time in August, it was the same time that current students, and therefore some players, would be getting their own class schedules in 2020. Of course, they looked completely different, but through gameplay, students encountered a class schedule that belonged to a student in the 19th century, reinforcing a sense of long-standing academic tradition, but connecting the story of the game to their current experience. So this sense of connecting past and present and future brought us to some interesting ideas about time and manipulating temporal concepts to explain how these ghosts and the poisoner, these characters were able to communicate with players. So we developed a few markers throughout the game, both to let players know that their progress in gameplay itself, but also to mark an element of time travel. So we used archival documents and elements like a time capsule and yearbooks, but also we played with the rhotic gates, which was an obvious element of time to kind of help us tell this full time travel story. But most importantly, we wanted to create a narrative that allowed students to feel like they were ridding the campus of a mysterious scourge or a disruption that spoke to the present moment. So we hoped that putting the fate of the campus in their hands, acting as heroes of the day, would allow them a sense of efficacy in a moment when many feel rather powerless as a result of the pandemic. So that was kind of our thought process behind game one. Paul, take it away.
So that was wonderful, a great overview of the process. So and one thing I want to discuss a little bit in terms of the creative process for this game, and not just in terms of narrative but puzzles. And one is that there's always a tension between narrative and puzzles, in the sense that sometimes you have to change the story to accommodate a certain puzzle set or work within some narrative constraint. And there's always a dialogue between the two, the construction of what the player does versus the story that you're trying to tell. And that definitely is a challenge to weave that in. As we move to the second game, as Hannah mentioned, the first game is based on time. And I think the two things we wanted to highlight for this whole game series was the archival holdings, that sense of, you know, the McGill identity that comes through the yearbooks and the documents and the archives and this rich archival history that's available through the university, digitally or otherwise. We were, of course, limited to the digital holdings. But it's also the spaces, right? The library spaces, the campus spaces. And that was also very important to us, not just to celebrate the beautiful spaces that the library offers in its various branches, but also, as we said earlier in the talk, to bring students into those spaces virtually, to allow them to experience the library in many ways. And I, having been a McGill graduate and an undergraduate at McGill, I can say that I was not aware of many of these beautiful library spaces. And I feel that I was denied the opportunity to study in, you know, in the Burke's reading room or in the Islamic Studies library. So in many ways, I think we're better preparing our incoming students to appreciate the full scope of what the campus has to offer. And we're giving them a very sort of entertaining guided tour. So the second game then focuses much more on space, whereas the first one had a temporal emphasis. We were focusing on clocks and times, and there was a greater emphasis on the archival holdings of the university, which makes sense within the time framework. This second game will continue the story, but it will involve moving through various spaces and maps and photospheres and all kinds of different areas that are available at the university. And we're using a whole different set of platforms. And what's interesting to think is that both games will have very different feels. And in the same way that the first game used a pastiche or a collage of different platforms and different sort of digital spaces to tell its story, and it still held its integrity and identity despite this kind of patchwork feel. Similarly, the second game has a very distinct feel from the first, even though the story continues. The general play space and the types of puzzles that you're going to encounter are going to be very, very different from the first. And the narrative thread carries us right through, where we were basically at the halfway point at the end of the first game. And this is where Amy, who we associate more with the arts and the humanities. She was a poet, she was a historian, so she very much embodies the kind of arts world of the university. And then we moved to Maud, who was a scientist through and through. And the focus on that second part of the game would be the sciences. And what's nice is you have a nice dialectic being created between time and space, the arts and sciences. So I think the ambition is to create, you know, at least to a microcosm of the university and its universal sort of ambitions.
Great, thanks so much, Paul. And you've had a spoiler alert there that Dr. Abbott is going to become the star of the next game. So before we move to the question period, which is going to be moderated by Jacqueline with help from Michelle, I'd like to turn now to Julien and to Hannah to speak a little bit about the reception of game one, what we learned and how that's helping us to shape what we're going to do going forward.
Sure. I'll start out and then pass it off to Julien. We leveraged multiple PR resources to promote the game. So just as the game itself was a pastiche, our promotion was also a pastiche, including an email campaign to a very large network, social media, the library blogs, digital news, including the McGill Reporter article you see that I put into an old-timey newspaper for fun. We also partnered with Frosh coordinators since initially we thought that this game was going to be mostly interesting to students. It was interesting to students, but what we discovered was it actually was also interesting to a much larger demographic, which was exciting. But we partnered with Frosh. The game was featured as an alternative activity each day for several faculties, including arts, science, and education. And our game was also featured as an innovative library organization activity by an academic library association. So that was pretty exciting to see for us. Promotion of the game in terms of wording and how we tried to draw people in, we encountered a challenge that I think people who are working on games 2 and 3 are also going to have to dance around. We had to be careful not to reveal any major spoilers. We wanted to draw people in, use language that enlists them and gets them excited. But when you're dealing with puzzles and clues, you also don't want to provide any answers, or you don't want to ruin any surprises. So this became one of the most challenging aspects of promoting the game. So we tried to strike a balance between giving enough away to get people interested, but not ruining the experience by saying too much. And all I can say is the best of luck to everybody who's promoting the next 2 games, because it's a hard line to walk. So a little bit of statistics. There have been 661 users who have visited the start page of the game since August 27th, which was our launch. These statistics are up until October 9th. Most users are from Canada, about 75%, 74%. United States is up next, Japan, but we've also, as Nathalie mentioned at the very beginning, have had players from all over the world: South Korea, the Netherlands, France, many other countries have been involved in this. It's really exciting that our reach has just been so expansive, especially with an international university like McGill. We're capturing people from all over, which is really exciting. Usage peaked at the start of the game once we first launched, and shortly after that McGill Reporter article was released on September 10th. So we also conducted a game survey, which I'll pass over to Julien to discuss.
Thanks, Anna. So yeah, really quickly, because I'm noticing we're running a little bit out of time, but me and Giovanna, another librarian, we created these surveys to have a little bit, to have more depth to our feedback, because we, of course, we receive feedback from our beta testers, but to receive feedback from the players is also essential, so we can have a better understanding of what worked and what was what we should improve for the second installment of the game. Great news is that people enjoy the game, so that means we did our job right at some point. So most of the users said it was really fun, challenging, intriguing as well. They rated the game 4 stars out of 5, which is pretty good. The difficulty, most of them said it was an okay difficulty, not too difficult, not too easy. Something we're gonna change probably for game 2, and we're working to meet this expectation, is that the game was a little bit too long, and we're trying to make it a little bit shorter and a little bit more streamlined as well. The disconnected nature of the first game, I think, reflected our holdings, like Paul said, and also the time theme that we were aiming for. But for the second game, we want to do also something a little bit more streamlined. And something very interesting is that most of the users said they learned something about the library, and that they learned either something about the collection, about the campus, about the resources available to them. So that's really something that we were aiming for. And I think we nailed it. So that's pretty good. And we also worked on the instant solution page because we wanted the players not to feel trapped or just stuck in a puzzle. They said, well, that's too hard. I just don't want to do it. So with this page, it actually encouraged the players to look at the instant solution page. So that's been very helpful to them as well. So I'm gonna end now, and we're gonna go to the Q&A. But I hope you play the second installment. We're working very hard on it, and we hope to see you online.
Hi, everyone. If you do have questions for the panelists, feel free to put them in the chat, either directed to myself or to Michelle, who's also managing this. But I would ask now that all of the panelists actually turn your videos back on so we can have a sense of who's speaking. And I'm going to stop the share. There we go. But I will start out with a question for Nicholas, actually. Nicholas, as a target demographic person, a roughly 18-year-old student, gamer, what effect did you have on the evolution of the original concept? Did you play a role in helping shape the game that was targeted to your sort of demographic?
Yeah, so I can answer that. It's a great question. So for this game, it was very minimal. I beta tested the first chapter of Raising Spirits, and I would give Paul my input here and there, just say, oh, this might be a little too long. You know, especially because, you know, kids our age, attention spans are just very short, right? So you want to keep kids engaged, and that's why moving through all these different mediums is super cool, right? Like, and that was one of the things I praised, that, you know, going from SoundCloud to Instagram to this, like, kids can see these things that they normally use, like, you know, Instagram, I normally use that, but seeing it in an interesting way, like, that's really cool, right? So yeah, I'd say for this game, I had just a little bit of input. It wasn't like a massive effect on the overall game, but it was little bits and pieces here and there that would definitely help.
One of them was, of course, the scene with the eyes and Amy, I think, might be a reference to Smash Brothers. The roulette that was going on at the end is a reference to is it Counter-Strike or Call of Duty?
Counter-Strike, yeah, Counter-Strike. So yeah, there was a few references to, like, video games, and with the Amy one as well. It almost looks like Borderlands as well, the video game, in terms of the text and all that. So I think kids our age can kind of they can, you know, relate to that and see what we were going for with that. Obviously, it's not one-to-one, but it's the idea, right? So,
and
yeah,
Paul,
there you go.
Do you want to chime in on the same question from your perspective? In designing the game, were you really targeting Nick's demographic? I was, yeah. One of the deliberate uses of particularly the social media aspect of the game was in a way to recreate, you know, one part of the vision was the life we live on our phone is a very fragmented life. We're always switching from apps into different sort of platforms and that type of thing. And I think that there's something about the game that replicates that movement from aesthetic to aesthetic, from platform to platform. So it duplicates what may be the experience of many people who spend quite a bit of time on their phone, and I'm guilty as charged. And I also spend a lot of time with you know, 17 and 18-year-olds. So I would like to think that some of their youth and diffuses. So there was a very deliberate attempt in designing the game to target the aesthetic and demographic that Nick participates in. A question on a related topic, actually, for Elisa. You mentioned socializing as a growing trend in games. Is there a place in this game for gamers to chat about what they've learned in Raising Spirits, or to talk as they play through the game, or to play it in teams?
Well, actually, they can do it. We don't have like a part of the platform because the development or the production for that part of a multiplayer is quite complex. But anyway, you could actually just meet up with the COVID friend you had, or at least digitally go through the game with someone else. But as Paul was saying, one of the really interesting things of this game is that it's nowhere. No, it's not a product that's somewhere. It's everywhere. It's like the poison. It's a little bit all over the place. So Yeah, in terms of socializing, I do think there's not a place to socialize. You can just socialize around the game as the game itself everywhere, like in the Instagram or in the chat or everywhere.
Yeah, Jacqueline, on this specific note, we created a Discord channel so people can play together remotely for the game. So that's available if people, if students want to meet and chat or just play the game together remotely. That's a feature that's available for the first game.
And we definitely got the feedback that those people that chose to play in pairs in particular had a heightened experience. I think the game is ideally played with two people, so there's dialogue and conversation. And although we didn't set it up that way initially, we figured out after the fact that it was probably an ideal situation having two people play at once.
Right. I think the fact that it is a game in the first place is also amazing for people my age, you know, because like reading a history book doesn't seem like the most attractive option to try and learn about McGill, especially just if you're in a different city or a different country, if you're not on campus. Like I know at Queens, it's 50% capacity in residence. And thankfully, you know, I got in, but not everybody's there, right? So it's just a really interesting opportunity for kids to be a part of McGill's sort of culture and campus without actually being there. So yeah.
I saw there was a follow-up question about the Discord channel. So just quickly, Discord is a platform that's used by a lot of gamers. You can stream a video game that you're playing. You can have video chats. You can have voice chats. You can have text chats, and you can make different rooms. So I think Julien made a bunch of different rooms for people to talk about different elements of the game. And if you do want to join the Discord channel, there is a link to the channel on the main website for the game.
We have another question actually for Greg this time. You mentioned that the game is an interesting piece of history and is part now of the digital legacy of the university, which, yes, indeed. Are there plans to keep some of the game online long-term, or are there plans to archive the projects or the puzzles in some way?
We're going to try to keep it online as long as possible, and I'm sure we will also figure out a way to archive the project. But yeah, we wanted to try to use technologies that are open, that are heavily utilized, that we know they're going to live on for a long time, and we try to host as much as we can off our own servers to maintain, you know, consistency. I don't know, Paul, if you wanted to share anything about in that regard as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think every effort is going to be made to preserve it as long as possible. But the fact of the matter is we are ultimately contingent on the people who are supplying these platforms. So if Instagram were to go out of business tomorrow through some unforeseen political decision, we may have a problem playing the game. So one thing I'd like to look at, and we can discuss this after the fact, is the possibility of very closely filming an entire playthrough with a narrative to at least preserve it, because it would be, as I said, we'll likely be able to play this for a long time to come, but there are so many, you know, there's at least a dozen different platforms, and any of those were to go offline, then it causes a problem.
Thanks to all for your questions. We're just about out of time, so I'm going to hand it over to Nathalie for a few final words and some thank yous.
Sorry, I was just writing a note to Chris. Thanks so much, everybody. One of the things we discovered with the survey is actually people enjoy playing this as groups. So the numbers that you see actually are probably not accurately reflecting the number of people playing. And so that's been increasingly an experience. But it also takes a group to make a game like this. So thank you, Paul, Elisa, Nicholas, Julien, Aeron, Hannah, Greg, and there's other thank yous as well here. To the library team who made today's events possible, and specifically really to Michelle and Jacqueline who carried the day today. Thank you very much. To the Social Sciences and Research Council of Canada for making this possible, as well as to very generous private sponsors, Ron Harvey and Doug Bagley, who've been supporting us through this Play On series of programming. And thanks to you all for coming and joining us. We look forward to seeing you at our next event on October the 27th. It's going to be at noon, and when Rebecca Earle from the University of Warwick in England will be speaking about a different kind of puzzle, resurrection cakes and the pleasure of metaphorical recipes. And of course, stay tuned for Game 2, which will be released on Halloween. And in the meantime, Should you deserve a break or feel that you deserve a break, take a little bit of time to play game one if you haven't done it already. We'll put the link in the chat and we'll send it in our follow-up email so that you can give it a whirl. Do it with friends. The surveys are telling us it's much more fun when you do it with friends. And do take a look at the hints page, which, by the way, is written in invisible ink. So if you can't see the hints and solutions right at first, remember that you probably need to highlight over the text you're looking to find. Thanks so much, everybody. Have fun playing.